All right.
Again, this is Jacob Trobe, tape 2, January 6, 1975.
Well, I'm retelling the saga of the General Frederick Morgan incident. General Morgan was a very high-ranking British officer at Chafe headquarters. Actually was, I think, the man responsible under Eisenhower for planning the invasion of Europe. I met him when he took on the assignment as the director for Germany of the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. I had many contacts with him in my capacity as the chief of mission for the Joint Distribution Committee. I found him a likable person, very much caste conscious and army rank conscious, but generally interested in wanting to do a decent job. One day he went to Berlin to examine the conditions of refugees there, and apparently as he sat around, I believe at dinner in the officers' club, he gave some report that the Jews that were coming through from Eastern Europe had a good deal of wealth, and they were being helped by what I guess he would have described, I don't remember the exact words, as an underground Jewish group. Essentially, he was charging that there was a well-organized conspiracy among Jews in Europe for moving the Jews out of Eastern Europe into Germany, and that all these Jews were not penniless. Of course, his statements shocked the world, particularly decent-minded persons in the United States and Jews. It was played up, I gather, on all the news media, and there was a goodly representation of the American press, then really news paper journalists, all in the hotel which I stayed in Frankfurt, Germany. That was called the press camp. They had, among the newspaper men covering this story was one Carl Levin, who was a very capable correspondent for the now defunct, then published New York Herald Tribune. He, among others, asked me what I was going to say about the matter. And I was very careful as this developed, and I then went in and I saw General Morgan. And I told General Morgan that I thought what he said was disgraceful, was inaccurate, was untrue. And with the vigor of my own youth, I said to him, not knowing how history is forgotten, I said that for the next 50 years you'll be quoted in fascist or semi-fascist literature. What a horrendous statement. I said perhaps there were a few Jews that had a few worldly possessions. You tell me that some maybe had a diamond. I could conceive that if someone had something, they would convert it to something they would carry on their body. But I knew the Jews that were coming through were penniless and hungry and things. As for their being helped, it was a very natural process for them to want to get out of an area in which they felt the sharpest of anti-Semitism and extermination, and it was not the conspiracy just to see that many persons along the route would help them get on with the mission. The United States then, however, I stayed with him, and in fact I told him that I considered his action, his statement, horrendous. At that point there were tremendous calls for his being fired by then Governor Lehman. After I spent these couple hours with him, and I think I went back for a second interview, but memory doesn't serve me whether it was one long one, but it would have been at least 2 hours. I wound up by delivering him, I guess, a letter either I delivered it immediately after the conference, which I repeated my accusations against tremendous disservice and horrendous and inaccurate comments, but I wound up by saying, since it was a mistake made by an honest man, I would not personally urge his dismissal. I released that to the press camp, and since everybody was calling for his dismissal, well, some of the papers dealt very fully and accurately with my statement. The line that was most important was that I, in contrast to other Jewish leadership, did not ask for his dismissal. I did it for the reason that I've mentioned, but I did it for another reason. There was such tremendous criticism of the American Army at that point because they were ill-equipped to deal with a surviving Jewish refugee. American Jewish soldiers were writing home, and there was tremendous criticism, so much so that at one point Judge Rifkin told me that at a meeting of Chafe headquarters, one of the generals put on the agenda, is there an organized Jewish plot to defame the American Army? Which of course was stupid and foolish, but just the fact that it could get on an agenda was to show you how rattled they were by all this criticism. Some of it, I must say, much of it unfair in a real sense. But at any rate, we felt that if we got General Morgan's scalp, it would not serve well the Jewish cause. I chatted at some length with Judge Rifkin. We walked the streets of Frankfurt, I believe one Friday afternoon. He complained to me bitterly about how all the good work he was trying to do with the Army was partly undone by injudicious comments of Jewish soldiers and others and criticism of others. And in that context, I felt we didn't want to get him. And he knew I was going to do that, and he fully approved. But nobody in the United States knew it. So then when the pressure came on JDC, people would say, we're not going to give money to an outfit that is represented in Germany by a bloke like that. And Eddie Warburg was then the president of the JDC, Edward M.M. Warburg. And I had met him in Germany, and I was the first to take him around to show him the scope of the problem as he was mustering out of the U.S. Army and was going to be returned as the president of the board of directors of the JDC. So I had a couple weeks, I believe, in Germany with him, taking him around and really, in a sense, giving him a true exposure to the job. He was with me at Bergen-Belsen once when Yossel Rosensaft said to him, and I think in this visit, I think we also, said to him in Yiddish, which Eddie Warburg didn't understand, if you can't give us food and other things that we deserve from the JDC, ship us typewriters so we can print the Yiddish statements and blast you all over the Jewish world. I didn't have the heart to tell Yossela that the Yiddish press was dying, that would be of no avail. But at any rate, we went back to the hotel in Frankfurt that night, and Eddie Warburg and I shared a very good room, but we shared it, and he couldn't sleep. He was so troubled by the exposure he had to to what had happened, of the death of so many, and the survivors and their plight, etc. So that when I was due to come home after this General Morgan thing, scrapping it out with him in Frankfurt for, I don't know, about 7 or 8 days, and the stuff being carried in the press, I got into Paris en route home, and I said to Herb Katsky, who's a swell guy, but Herb is not given to excessive humor. He certainly doesn't like to be humorous about serious subjects. And I said to him, but at this point, I thought he was very funny. I said to him, you know, Herb, in all seriousness, I am upset about how what I said about General Morgan is hurting JDC. I feel absolutely correct in what I did, but why should JDC lose money that they need to buy relief supplies for surviving Jews because I made a statement, correct as it may be? I think I'll send a wire to New York resigning. So he said to me, he really wasn't humorous, but I thought it was very funny, what do you want to do that for, Jake? If they want to fire you, when you get there, they'll fire you. So I didn't send the wire. I arrived. I had 2 young babies. I said to my wife, hell's going to break loose, but I'm here 12 hours ahead of time. I want to spend it with you and my 2 children. And then I said, then I'll go in the JDC office and I'll do everything. I fully expect them to fire me anyhow, Adele. So they called me that night. Is Jake home yet? Mo Levitt called me. You know, Moses A. Levitt. And, oh, yes, Jake's home. And I made a date to go in the first thing the next morning, it being Saturday morning. I walked in there fully expecting to be canned and quite willing to accept it and resign if necessary. In the office that morning, since it was the Shabbos, that they weren't, they were talking. There was Joe Schwartz, Mo Levitt, and one of Joe Schwartz's friends, Sobolov, who was in town visiting. Sobolov is one of the distinguished Jewish fundraisers, head of the Federation of Detroit, LA. And they were very nice. And they were so nice, I thought, well, that's the preliminary to decapitation. Well, lo and behold, I went through the whole morning. Nothing happened. I told them then, or the next day or so, I didn't want to go back to Germany because I really wanted to have my family with me, and Germany was not a place to take the family and get approval, and they offered me their next biggest post, Italy. I later discovered that when they debated what to do about me at the Administrative Committee of JDC, I am told that Eddie Warburg said, now look, I know Jake Trobe. I lived with him in Germany for a couple of weeks. We had a very intense thing. I found him very wise or sound and judicious. And I can only tell you, without knowing the details, if Jake Trobe said that, I suspect he had a very good basis for doing what he did. And what kind of an organization are we, anyhow, if just because we get the slings and can lose some money, if we really don't have in our hearts certainty that Trobe was wrong or we have no right. And they voted not to take any action. No action was ever taken. It was never suggested to me to leave JDC. In fact, they gave me their next important post. I have remained lifelong friends to Joe Schwartz. Since then, they still invite me to their annual meetings. We consider ourselves the old school tie. So that was the General Morgan. I do say that I was kind of glad to forget the incident, only to find that somebody pointed out to me in a Yiddish newspaper many years later, when General Morgan was trying to tell somebody, I think he wrote a book or something, but at any rate, in the Yiddish paper it was reported that he mentioned with warmth his relationship with me. I guess that I could have done without. The other cute part of the story is I come from a Yiddish-speaking household, and my mother was hearing all this sort of thing, and she picks up her Yiddish newspaper, I don't know whether it's the Morgen Journal or the Tageblatt, whatever is published in that day, and Eddie Cantor took a full-page ad and said, Morgan and Trobe must go. Well, you can imagine how my mother felt about, I don't think she would have minded getting rid of Morgan, but to get rid of her son Jake was not quite right. Okay. Anything else for me?
What about Judge Rifkin?
Judge Rifkin came into the job, came in again without any, I think he may have had 1.8, I don't know if he had immediately, applied himself to the thing. I found him a very sound, wise, mature person. I was in the habit of giving him a great deal of information in the first weeks. He then had this aide, I think Hyman, that was able to flesh out information for him. I think he came in, in October and November. We probably only had about 8 weeks together. I have nothing but respect for his ability. He obviously had the caliber to be able to deal at the highest level with the British, with the American Army officials effectively. He was a very bright man, a very fine man, and my impressions, while it was a short period, I also remember sitting with him in the home of Nachum Goldman, who was then, who was visiting in Frankfurt, Germany one Sunday. Maybe we were at Simon Rifkin's home, but discussing the Jewish problems. I also remember sitting in a Frankfurt hotel with David Ben-Gurion, and we sat around like the two of us are sitting here, and Joe Schwartz, maybe one and we were talking about the surviving Jews, and David Ben-Gurion said, you shouldn't be spending any money, Dr. Schwartz, on the surviving Jews to help them in France and in Belgium and this sort of thing. That, in other words, that's kaput. The only money that you should be spending is money in Palestine, and there's no future. Basically, if you'd have followed David Ben-Gurion's advice, JDC would have never had a mission of, as we did in many of those Western European countries.
He wasn't opposed to...
He basically felt that no Jew, the Jew of France, the Jew of Italy, the Jew of Belgium, regardless of how well placed they were, etc., they should have learned the lesson from the war and give up and return to Palestine. Now, I think David Ben-Gurion and his zealousness about Palestine at that point, in the fall of 1944, I think misread. There's no question that a lot of French Jews, Belgian Jews, Dutch Jews were very much going to start all over again. And certainly JDC's help was important in that first period to number of them. I'm not talking about the North African Jews who came later. I'm talking about the so-called the French Jews, who were mixed already. There were pre-World War I old line French Jews, and there was this whole influx between the two wars. And you've had a new wave after the North Africans. So, capable and honorable and fine people also misread history. That's why we need historians like you. Anything else?
Okay, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. I don't know if you got anything out of it, but you can see I...